Hello and welcome to Food Safety Fridays. My name is Simon Timperley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Today's subject is implementing an FSSC 22000 version 6 compliant food safety and quality management system. And today's expert speaker is Tony Connor. No finer speaker to deliver these GFSI type training webinars. So welcome, Tony. Nice to have you along.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Tell us in the cyber where you're joining from. It's the first food safeties of 2024. We're already in February the 2nd. So tell us where you're joining from. I'm going to play the sponsors ads and we'll be back for the presentation in a couple of minutes. Okay. Okay, cut off a bit early there. Hand you over to Tony for the presentation. I'll be back for the Q&A later. Okay.
Thank you, Simon. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. So welcome to this Food Safety Friday presentation on implementing the FSSC 22000 version 6 compliant food safety management system. FSSC 22000 was developed to facilitate broader acceptance of ISO 22000 recognition by GFSI. The scheme was first published in 2009 and there are currently over 34,000 certified organizations worldwide. In order to clarify requirements for PRPs and to allow for recognition by GFSI, industry stakeholders developed detailed technical specifications covering sector prerequisite programs that are used in addition to ISO 22000. The audit requirements for certification consist of ISO 22000, sector-specific prerequisite programs, FSC, SSC 22000 additional requirements. The additional requirements fill gaps between the GFSI benchmark requirements and ISO 22000 and the sector PRPs, and allow the certification scheme to be recognized by GFSI. There are prerequisite programs for 7 supply chain sectors. Version 6 was published in April 2023 and is effective April 2024. It includes food sector categories for pre-processing and processing of food, catering, packaging, retail, and transport and storage. Part 2 covers requirements for organizations to be audited. Audit requirements are in Section 2 requirements. ISO TS 22001 Prerequisite Programs on Food Safety Part 1 Food Manufacturing is applicable to the following food sector categories, and this is the technical specification we'll talk about mostly today. ISO 22000. It's an international standard that specifies requirements for a food safety management system. ISO 22000 combines generally recognized key elements to ensure food safety. Clear communication along the food chain is essential to ensure that all relevant food safety hazards are identified and adequately controlled. ISO 22000 combines Codex Alimentarius hazard principles and application steps with prerequisite programs. The effective production of safe products required a detailed hazard control plan and the integration of prerequisite programs. In addition, ISO 22000 is based on management principles that are common to ISO management system standards. ISO 22000 is aligned with the requirements of ISO 9001. This is in order to enhance the compatibility of the two standards and to ease their joint or integrated implementation. These slides are for reference, and a comparison of ISO 9001 Quality Management System requirements and ISO 22000 Food Safety Management System requirements. If you can't read all the slides because of the streaming, then you will get a PDF copy, which you'll be able to see everything in more detail. Okay, plan, do, check, and act cycle. The overall framework of a food safety management system and corresponding ISO 22000 sections. Operation, planning, and control. ISO 22000 has a structured approach to combining CCPs with operational prerequisite programs and prerequisite programs into a single integrated food safety management system. On to 4.1, understanding the context, organization in context. A requirement to determine external and internal issues, both positive and negative, that affect the organization's ability to achieve the intended results of its food safety management system. Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. The organization shall determine interested parties that are relevant and the relevant requirements of interested parties of the food safety management system. Scope. Determining the scope of the food safety management. The scope shall specify the products, services, processes, and production sites, also considering 4.1 and 4.2. Food safety management system. The organization shall establish, implement, maintain, update, and continually improve a food safety management system, including the processes needed and their interactions in accordance with the requirements of this standard. Leadership and commitment. Top management shall demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the food safety management system with specific requirements including food safety policy and objectives. So management should establish and communicate a food safety policy. Onto organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Top management need to assign responsibilities and authorities. They need to be communicated and understood, including a food safety team and a food safety team leader. The standard describes food safety team leader responsibilities and that all persons shall have responsibility to report problems with regarding to the food safety management system to identified persons. Planning includes actions to address risks and opportunities. A requirement to plan to address the issues referred to in 5.4.1 and requirements referred to in 4.2 and 4.3 and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. 6.2, objectives of the food safety management system and planning to achieve them. It includes certain requirements for objectives. It includes requirements for planning how to achieve its objectives. 6.3 covers planning of changes, the purposes of their changes and their potential consequences, and to ensure the continued integrity of the food safety management system, the availability of resources to effectively implement changes, and allocation or reallocation of resources. So section 7, support, it includes 7.1 resources. There's a requirement to determine and provide resources needed, a requirement for people with competent people and experts, a requirement for infrastructure, requirements for work environment, for externally developed elements of the food safety management system, and control of externally provided processes, products, or services. There are requirements for competence, awareness. All relevant persons doing work shall be aware of the food safety policy, the objectives, their individual contribution, and the implications of not conforming with requirements. 7.4, communication. There's a greater emphasis on specifying internal and external communications relevant to the food safety management system. Documented information. The organization's food safety management system shall include documented information required by the standard, necessary for the effectiveness of the food safety management system, and required by statutory regulatory authorities and customers. The extent of information can differ from one organization to another and depends on the size of the organization, type of activities, process, products, and services, the complexity of processes and their interactions, and the competence of persons. Onto operational planning and control. Section 8 includes hazard control and preliminary steps to hazard analysis, hazard assessment, validation, hazard control plan, and verification. So let's look at section 8 sections. Operational planning and control. There's a need to plan, implement, control, maintain, and update the processes needed to meet requirements for the realization of safe products, and to implement the actions determined in 6.1, actions to address risks and opportunities. There's a requirement for a traceability system which should be in place to identify incoming material from the suppliers and the first stage of distribution route of the end product. Emergency preparation and response. Top management shall ensure procedures are in place to respond to potential emergency situations or incidents that can have an impact on food safety. 8.42 covers handling of emergencies and incidents. Let's go back to prerequisite programs. These assist in controlling or preventing the introduction of food safety hazards, eliminate, prevent, or reduce contamination of products, including cross-contamination, and control, minimize, and/or prevent food safety hazard levels. ISO 22000 requires that effective control measures should be in place to reduce the risk of contamination of food when establishing PRPs. So we'll come on to these shortly. For 8.2.1, the organisation shall establish, implement, maintain and update PRPs to facilitate the prevention or reduction of contaminants, including food safety hazards in the product processing and work environment. The PRP shall be appropriate and approved by the food safety team. When selecting and establishing PRPs, the organisation should consider applicable part of ISO TS 22000 series, applicable standards, codes of practice and guidelines. Training. All food handlers should be trained in personal hygiene as well as in the specific operation with which they are working to a level commensurate with their duties. So the organisation should consider the applicable part of ISO TS 22002 series. In this case, we're going to talk about food manufacturers and Part 1, food manufacturing. This technical specification does not duplicate requirements for those given into ISO 22000 and is intended to be used in conjunction with ISO 22000. So 22002 Part 1 specifies detailed requirements for specifically considered in relation to ISO 22000 Clause 8.2.4. So let's go through these. Construction and layout of buildings, environment, locations and establishments. There are requirements for appropriate buildings in terms of construction, including durable materials, design and maintenance, requirements to control any environmental risks, and requirements to maintain the site and control access. Section 5 covers layout of premises and workspace. Internal layouts need to be designed, constructed and maintained to facilitate good hygiene and manufacturing practices. There are requirements for appropriate internal structures and fittings, including ceilings, doors, drains, floors and walls. There are requirements for equipment design, maintenance and location such that its operation is hygienic. There are requirements for laboratory facilities, storage facilities and temporary structures. Utilities. There are requirements for water supply, boiler chemicals, air quality ventilation, compressed air and gases, and lighting. Utility supplies need to minimize the risk of product contamination. Appropriate treatments such as filtration should be in place. The quality of utility supplies needs to be monitored. Section 7 is waste disposal. Systems should be in place to ensure that waste materials are identified, collected, removed, and disposed of in a manner that prevents contamination of the facility and products. Section 8, equipment, suitability, cleaning and maintenance, including hygienic design, product contact surfaces, temperature control and monitoring equipment, cleaning plant, utensils and equipment, preventive and corrective maintenance. On to Section 9, management of purchased materials. There needs to be an assessment of suppliers. There needs to be a defined process for the selection, approval, and monitor of suppliers. Food fraud needs to be considered. Supplier approval can be by third-party certification or audit. Supplier assessment needs to be documented. Systems should be in place for the purchase and verification of materials which impact on food safety. And in 9.3, it covers incoming material requirements. On to 10, measures for prevention of cross-contamination. Systems should be in place to prevent, control, and detect product contamination, including allergen, microbiological, and physical contamination. Allergen contamination can require significant controls if you have different allergens in different products. Including verification and validation. Onto cleaning and sanitizing. There are general requirements. Requirements for cleaning and sanitizing agents and tools, cleaning and sanitization procedures and programs, CIP or cleaning in place, monitoring of sanitation effectiveness, Cleaning and sanitisation programs should ensure that food processing equipment and environment are maintained in a hygienic condition. The effectiveness of cleaning should be monitored. On to Section 12, Pest Control. The requirements for pest control programs preventing access. Pest prevention measures should be in place to minimise the risk of pest infestation. On to Section 13, Personnel Hygiene and Employee Facilities. Personal hygiene and behaviours should be established proportional to the hazard posed to the process or area of product. There should be appropriate standards of facilities, toilets and workwear. So requirements include hygiene facilities, canteens, health status, illness, personal cleanliness, personal behaviour, and protective clothing. Rework. The requirements for storage, identification and traceability, and rework usage. Systems should be in place to ensure that rework is stored, handled, and used such that product safety, traceability, and regulatory compliance are maintained. 15. Product recall procedures. Product recall procedures should ensure that products can be identified, located, and removed from all necessary points in the supply chain. Warehousing. Materials and products need to be stored in clean, dry, ventilated spaces and protected from dust, condensation, fumes, odours, and other sources of contamination. There are also requirements for vehicles, conveyances, and containers. Onto product information and consumer awareness. Product information should be presented to consumers in such a way to enable them to understand its importance and make informed choices. There is requirements for control of labelling of pre-packaged foods. Onto food defence, biovigilance and bioterrorism. Management should assess the hazard to products posed by potential acts of sabotage, vandalism or terrorism and put in place proportional protective measures including access controls. So, when selecting or establishing PRPs, the food safety team will need to consider and utilise appropriate information, and prerequisite programs will need to be appropriate. Let's move on with ISO 22000, Section 8, Operational Hazard Control and Preliminary Steps to Hazard Analysis. Hazard Control. To carry out the hazard analysis, preliminary documented information shall be collected and maintained and updated. This includes applicable statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements, the organisation's products, processes, and equipment, and food safety hazards. Characteristics of raw materials, ingredients, product contact materials. All raw materials, ingredients, and product contact materials shall be described in documents to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis. It should include the following information as appropriate: biological, chemical, and physical characteristics, composition of formulated ingredients, acceptance of criteria related to food safety or specifications of purchased materials and ingredients. The characteristics of end products shall be described in documents to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis, including information on the following as appropriate: product name or similar, composition, biological, chemical, and physical characteristics relevant for food safety, intended shelf life and storage conditions, packaging, labelling related to food safety, and instructions for handling, preparation, and intended use, methods of distribution and delivery. The intended use, reasonably expected handling of the end product, and any unintended but reasonably expected mishandling and misuse of the end product shall be considered and shall be described in documents to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis. Onto flow diagrams. There's requirements to prepare flow diagrams and for on-site confirmation of flow diagrams. And then description of processes and process environments. The food safety team need to describe to the extent needed to conduct the hazard analysis. So Section 8 operation includes hazard analysis. The food safety team shall conduct a hazard analysis based on preliminary information. The organisation shall identify and document all food safety hazards that are reasonably expected to occur in relation to type of product, type of process, and process environment. The organisation shall determine the acceptable level in the end product of each food safety hazard identified. So ISO 22000 refers to Codex General Principles of Food Hygiene. HACCP is a system used to identify, present, and control food safety hazards. So refer to Codex International Code of Practice General Principles of Food Hygiene, Section 19. This is for reference of HACCP application from Codex versus the ISO 22000 clauses. As I said, it probably be clearer in a PDF if you can't read it while it's being streamed. The HACCP system is designed, validated, and implemented in accordance with the following 7 principles. 1. Conduct a hazard analysis and identify control measures. Determine the critical control points. 3. Establish validated critical limits. 4. Establish a system to monitor control of CCPs. 5. Establish corrective actions to be taken when monitoring indicates a deviation from a critical limit at a CCP has occurred. 7. Validate the HACCP plan and establish procedures for verification to confirm that a HACCP system is working as intended. 7. Establish documentation concerning all procedures and record appropriate to these principles and their application. In addition, food safety hazards can be identified and recorded based on several factors, including experience and the food safety team knowledge and external and internal information. The main types of hazards include biological, chemical, and physical hazards, but can also include allergens and radiological substances. ISO 22000 Clause 8.5.2.2.2 requires that the organisation shall identify steps at which each food safety hazard can be introduced, present, increase, or persist. For each food safety hazard identified, the acceptable level of the hazard in the end product is determined, justified, and recorded. This hazard list is a preliminary hazard list and covers all hazards that could potentially occur in the product. Onto hazard assessment. Each potential food safety hazard is risk assessed to determine whether its elimination or reduction to acceptable levels is required to produce a safe product, and also any controls required to achieve the acceptable levels. For each step, the grades of impact, the severity of its adverse health effects in relation to its intended use, and probability, the likelihood of its occurrence in the end product prior to application of control measures, are allotted, and the combined matrix used to judge the significance and priority for elimination or minimization of the hazard. So I tend to use a 3x3 hazard risk assessment. The severity of the health effects is multiplied by the likelihood. Some people use a 5.5, but I prefer to keep it simple. So the system works like this. First, the food safety team assess the likelihood of the hazard occurring. So 1 for highly unlikely, 2 possible, 3 likely. Then the team assess the severity of the hazard, 1 for not severe, 2 could possibly cause illness, 3 for severe and fatal. When doing this, the food safety team factor in vulnerability of the target consumer, the survival and multiplication of any biological hazards and any likely toxic production, the presence of chemicals or foreign bodies, contamination at any stage in the process, and possible deliberate contamination or adulteration to get to the severity score to determine all the significant food safety hazards. In this example, all the food safety hazards that score 9 are regarded as significant and form a significant food safety hazard list. On to selection and categorization of control measures. The HACCP team must then consider what control measures, if any, exist, which can be applied for each hazard. More than one control measure may be required to control a specific hazard, and more than one hazard may be controlled by a specific control measure. The HACCP team should select an appropriate control measure or combination of control measures that will be capable of preventing or reducing the identified significant food safety hazard to defined acceptable levels. When developing your hazard analysis, it's important to keep supporting documentation for the decisions reached by the team. Remember to list the actual hazard or organism rather than just a general hazard whenever possible. So, continuing selection and categorization of control measures. Using a systematic approach, the food safety team categorized the selected identified control measures to be managed as OPRPs or CCPs. So for each of the control measures selected, there needs to be an assessment. So in the slides here, the control measure section is color-coded. So the selection of control measures goes with the following questions. What is the likelihood failure of its function? Consider if it never fails, like risk of failure, possible failure, likely failure, guaranteed failure. Based on the above, select whether you think something should be a CCP, OPRP, or PIP, or not effective. So if we proceed through the questions in ISO 22000, what is the severity of the consequence in the case of failure in its functioning? What is the effect on the identified significant food safety hazards? What is the location in relation to the other control measures? Is the control measure specifically established to reduce the hazard to an acceptable level? Is the control measure a single measure or is it part of a combination of control measures? Feasibility. What is the feasibility of establishing measurable critical limits and all measurable or observable action criteria? What is the feasibility of monitoring to detect any failure to remain within critical limit and or measurable or observable action criteria? What's the feasibility of applying timely corrective actions in case of failure? So it's good practice to make notes of your findings from your assessment of the control measures. In determining OPRPs and CCPs, ISO 22000 requires the categorization to be carried out using a systematic approach. So I complete the hazard assessment using the Codex decision tree. This helps particularly to decide the CCPs. So using the Codex decision tree, can the significant hazard be controlled to an acceptable level at this step by prerequisite programs? If no, proceed to question 2. Do the specific control measures for an identified significant hazard exist at this step? If no, this is not a CCP. Subsequent steps should be evaluated for a CCP. If yes, proceed to question 3. Will a subsequent step prevent or eliminate the identified significant hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level? If yes, that subsequent step should be a CCP. If no, proceed to question 4. Can this step specifically prevent or eliminate the identified significant hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level? If no, modify the step, process, or product to implement a control measure. If yes, this step is a critical control point. So in this step and at previous assessments of control measures, we need to consider whether the control measure works in combination with the control measure at another step. And in that case, both steps may be considered as OPRPs or CCPs. So confirm your decisions if control measures are to be implemented as CCPs, OPRPs, or PRPs. As you have seen, I use an Excel spreadsheet I call the hazard calculator. Alternately, you could use a form, but that means one form for each hazard assessed. Or you could use a worksheet similar to one in Codex General Principles. Moving on, the food safety team validate that the control measures and combination of control measures included in the hazard control plan. The team should document the validation methodology and evidence of capability of the control measures to achieve the intended control. Supporting validation information can consist of information from regulatory limits or industry code of practice guidelines, scientific journals, documented challenge studies, and in-house data. On to 8.5, hazard control plan. So now we have decided if control measures are to be part of operational prerequisite programs or CCPs in the hazard control plan. Significant hazards that are not controlled by CCPs should be controlled by operational prerequisite programs. Other hazards identified in the preliminary hazard list should be adequately controlled by prerequisite programs. The hazard control plan needs to include for each control measure at each CCP or OPRP, the food safety hazard to be controlled, critical limits at CCP or action criteria for OPRP, monitoring procedures, corrections to be made if critical limits or action criteria are not met, responsibilities and authorities, records of monitoring. Many critical control points are commonly applied in food processing and production. Typical ones include chilling or freezing, cooking, acidification, and method detection. There are many more possible CCPs. Not every process is the same, and that's why it's important to conduct your own hazard analysis. A critical limit is a maximum or minimum value to which a physical, biological, or chemical hazard must be controlled at a critical control point to prevent, eliminate, or reduce to an acceptable level the occurrence of the identified hazard. ISO 22000 requires that as well as critical limit at CCPs, action criteria for operational prerequisite programs need to be specified. The hazard documentation must identify hazard and pathogen, including the level of prevention or reduction required, the processing steps that will achieve the reduction or prevention. You need to establish a critical limit for every control measure you need to apply at a CCP and action criteria for every OPRP. Moving on to monitoring systems, actions, and implementation. Monitoring systems at CCPs and for OPRPs. Monitoring should ideally provide information in real time to make adjustments to ensure control of the process. Where possible, process adjustments should be made when monitoring results indicate a trend towards loss of control. The organization needs to specify corrections and corrective actions to be taken when critical limits or action criterion are not met. Deviations from action criterion and critical limits will occur from time to time, and therefore you need to have planned corrections and corrective actions. The organisation shall implement and maintain the hazard control plan and retain evidence of its implementation as documented information. The plan should include process step, hazard control measure, action criteria, critical limits, monitoring procedures, corrections, corrective action, responsibilities, reference to relevant records. So monitoring procedures such as pasteurization, a reference to relevant records, such as a pasteurizer log sheet. Clause 8.6 covers updating information specifying the PRPs and the hazard control plan. Moving on in section 8. The organisation should provide evidence that specified monitoring and messaging methods and equipment are in use are adequate for the activities related to PRPs and the hazard control plan. Equipment used shall be calibrated or verified. Organisations shall establish, implement and maintain verification activities. The verification planning shall define purpose, methods, frequencies and responsibilities for the activities. These activities shall confirm PRPs are effective, hazard control plan is effective, hazard levels are within identified acceptable levels, the input to hazard analysis is updated, and any other actions determined by the organisation are implemented and effective. 8.8.2 covers analysis of results of verification activities. The food safety team shall conduct an analysis of the results of verification that shall be used as an input to the performance evaluation. 8.9 covers control of product and process non-conformities, including corrections, corrective actions, and handling of potentially unsafe products. 8.95 covers withdrawal and recall. There's a need to establish and maintain documented information for notifying relevant interested parties and handling withdrawn and recall products as well as products still in stock. The cause, extent, and result of the withdrawal or recall needs to be retained as documented information. On to section 9. Monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. You need to specify what needs to be monitored and measured, how, when, and by who. The organisation shall analyse and evaluate appropriate data arising from monitoring and measurement, including the results of verification activities related to PRPs and the hazard control plan, internal audits, and external audits. On to 9.2. The organisation shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the food safety management system conforms to the organisation's own requirements for its food safety management system, requirements of the standard, is effectively implemented and maintained, and the organisation shall retain documented information as evidence. 9.3 is management review. And management review input information on the performance and the effectiveness of a food safety management system, including trends, is required for input. And the output includes decisions and actions for improvement, including any need for updates and changing to the food safety management system, including resource needs and revision of policy and objectives. Section 10 is improvement, includes requirements for non-conformity, corrective action, continued improvement, and update of the system. So on to FSSC additional requirements version 6. So audit requirements include this section, FSSC 22000 additional requirements. The following specific additional requirements for the food safety management system are included in the scheme. So new elements include, in version 6, include food safety and quality culture, quality control, and transports being added to storage. Other new elements include equipment management, food loss and waste, communication requirements. So let's have a look through these requirements. Management of services and purchase materials. Where laboratory analysis services are used for the verification or validation of food safety, these shall be conducted by a competent laboratory, including both internal and external laboratories. This can be by successful participation in proficiency testing programs, regulatory approved programs, or accreditation to an international standard such as ISO 22005, which is a standard for general requirements for competence of testing and calibration laboratories, and allows laboratories to demonstrate they operate competently and generate valid results. Just mention 7.16, which is control of externally provided processes, products, or services. In addition to this, there is a requirement to have a documented procedure for procurement in emergency situations, so purchasing in emergency situations. Where applicable, the organisation shall have a policy for the procurement of animals, fish, and seafood that are subject to control of prohibited substances such as veterinary medicines and pesticides. For food categories C, D, I, G, and K, the organisation shall establish, implement, and maintain a review process for product specifications. For packaging manufacturers, there's a new requirement for the control of recycled packaging. A compliant food safety management system needs to include documentation for managing process of purchasing materials and services, including supplier assessment, approval, and monitoring. Clause 8.5.1.3 covers characteristics of end products. The organisation needs to ensure that finished products are labelled according to all applicable food safety, including allergen, statutory, and regulatory requirements in the country of intended sale. Where a claim is made, such as allergen, nutritional, method of production, chain of custody, raw material status, etc., is made on the product label or packaging, the organisation shall maintain evidence of validation to support the claim and have verification systems in place, including traceability and mass balance. For packaging, there are new requirements for artwork management and print control procedures. Onto food defence and threat assessment. You need to conduct and document a threat assessment based on defined methodology and develop and implement appropriate mitigation measures. The organisation needs to produce a documented food defence plan based on the threat assessment, specifying migration measures and verification procedures. The plan shall comply with applicable legislation, cover the processes and products within the scope of the organisation, and be kept up to date. Onto food fraud mitigation, there needs to be a vulnerability assessment based on defined methodology, and then there needs to be appropriate mitigation measures for significant vulnerabilities. Then there needs to be a food fraud mitigation plan specifying the mitigation measures covering the processed products. The food fraud mitigation plan shall be supported by the organisation's food safety management system and comply with applicable legislation and kept up to date. 2.5.5 is logo use. Certified organisations are entitled to use the FSSC 22000 logo for marketing activities. 2.5.6 is management of allergens. The organisation shall have a documented allergen management plan in place that includes a list of the allergens handled on site, including raw materials and finished products. A risk assessment covering all potential sources of allergen cross-contamination, identification and implementation of control measures to reduce or eliminate the risk of cross-contamination, validation and verification of these control measures. There are requirements for limited use of precautionary or warning labels. All personnel shall receive training in allergen awareness and specific training on allergen control measures associated with their area of work. The allergen management plan should be reviewed at least annually and following any significant change. Environmental monitoring. Risk-based environmental monitoring programs should be in place for pathogens, spoilage, and indicator organisms. Documented procedures for the evaluation of the effectiveness of all controls on preventing contamination from the manufacturing environment. And this shall include at a minimum the evaluation of microbiological controls present and comply with legal and customary requirements. The data of environmental activities, including regular trend analysis. The environmental monitoring program needs to be reviewed annually and when there are some defined changes or consistent lack of positive testing results, trends in out of specification results, etc. On to food safety and quality culture. In addition, and in accordance with clause 5.1, senior management need to establish, implement and maintain a food safety and quality culture objectives as part of the management system. A fundamental factor in the management of product safety is the safety culture. For this to flourish and the importance of product safety to be understood by all members of staff, it needs to be led from the top of the organisation to ensure that necessary commitments and resources and support are available. The following elements shall be addressed as a minimum: communication, training, employee feedback and engagement, performance measurement of defined activities covering all sections of the organisation impacting on food safety and quality. The objectives shall be supported by a documented food safety and quality culture plan with targets and timelines and included in the management review and continuous improvement processes of the management system. On to quality control. There's a requirement to establish, implement and maintain a quality policy and quality objectives. To establish, implement and maintain quality parameters in line with finished product specifications for all products and product groups. To undertake analysis and evaluation of the results of the quality control parameters and include it as input for the management review. You should include quality elements as defined in the clause within the scope of internal audit as well. Quality control procedures, including for unit weight and volume, need to be established and implemented to ensure products meet the applicable customer and legal requirements. There needs to be a program for calibration and verification of equipment used for quantity and quality control. Line startup and changeover procedures shall be established and implemented to ensure products, including packaging and label, meet applicable requirements. Next is transport, storage, and warehousing. There's a requirement to establish, implement, and maintain a procedure. There needs to be specified stock rotation system that includes FIFO and FIFO, first expired, first out, and first in, first out requirements. Where transport tankers are used, there are requirements for organisations that use tankers for transportation of their final product to have a documented risk-based plan to address tank cleaning. There are also requirements for organisations receiving raw material in tankers. onto hazard control and measures for prevention of cross-contamination. There are specific requirements for packaging, processing of perishable animal products and animal feed. For all food chain categories, the following, excluding F2, the following requirements relating to food safety matter management apply. The organisation shall have a risk assessment in place to determine the need and type of foreign body detection equipment required. Where the organisation deems no foreign body detection equipment is necessary, justification shall be maintained as documented information. Foreign body detection equipment includes equipment such as magnets, metal detectors, X-ray equipment, filters and sieves. A documented procedure needs to be in place for the management and use of the equipment selected. The organisation needs to have controls in place for foreign matter management, including procedures for management of all breakages linked to potential physical contamination. On to PRP verification. There needs to be routine site inspections and PRP checks to verify that site, production environment and processing equipment are maintained in a suitable condition. The frequency and content of site inspections needs to be based on risk, where normally high risk and open product areas are given priority. There needs to be a defined sampling criteria linked to a relevant technical specification. Verification results shall be retained as documented information and shall be communicated. So you should have inspection records and records of corrections and corrective actions. On to product design and development. The requirements for a procedure for new products and changes to products. There should be an evaluation of the impact of change taking into account any new food safety hazards, including allergen. It needs to take into account resource and training needs, equipment and maintenance requirements, and the need to conduct production and shelf life trials. Ongoing shelf life verification must be in place at a frequency based on risk. Where ready-to-cook product is produced, the cooking instructions provided must be validated to ensure food safety is maintained. 2.5.14 covers health status for food category D. Onto equipment management. There's a requirement for a documented purchase specification which addresses hygienic design, applicable legal and customer requirements, and the intended use of equipment, including product handled. The supplier shall provide evidence of meeting the purchase specification prior to installation. There's a requirement to establish and maintain a risk-based change management process for new equipment or any changes to existing equipment. This shall be adequately documented, including evidence of successful commissioning. Onto food loss and waste, which is a new section. You need to have a documented policy and objectives dealing with the organization's strategy to reduce food loss and waste. You need to reduce food loss and waste within your organization and the related food chain. You need to have controls in place to manage products donated to not-for-profit organization, employees, and other organizations. You need to manage surplus products and byproducts intended as animal feed. And these processes need to comply with applicable legislation. Onto communication requirements. In addition to 8.4.2 of ISO 22000, the organisation shall inform the certification body within 3 working days of commencement of events or situations such as serious events that impact on the food safety management system legality and or the integrity of certification, Such situations include war, strike, terrorism, fire, crime, flood, earthquake, and also serious situations where the integrity of the certification is at risk and where the foundation can be brought into disrepute. These include, but are not limited to, public food safety events, actions imposed by regulatory authorities, legal proceedings, fraudulent activities. And the last one in additional requirements is requirements for organizations with multi-site certification. So that's the end of that presentation. It was a condensed version of ISO 22000 in there, so you could look back to, there's a link in the PDF that you'll get, the previous ISO 22000 presentation that we did. I'd just like to say most of the procedures, tools, etc. that you saw in this presentation was from the IFSQN, FSSC 22000 Food Safety Management System Implementation Package, which include, as you've seen, procedures and records, prerequisite program manual, hazard documents and tools, laboratory quality manual, training presentations, gap analysis checklists, a workbook, a startup guide, and free online technical support by myself. So any questions?
Yes, there are questions, Tony. Just to say, you should see the link in the sidebar to the Food Safety Management System. It says find out more, that button. You can click that and it'll open up a new window so you can check that. But also we'll include it in the follow-up email. So extensive documentation package there, as you saw. And Tony whipped through it. He did one at the start. You know, there's a lot to get through. So questions? Let's see.
I can still hear the sound.
Yes.
Yes, sorry, the presentation was very fast. I'm not going to apologize for that. Refer back to the PDF and you'll be able to see the video again if you want. But there's a lot to cover, so I tried to condense it as much as I could. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What criteria do we need to have to move from other GFSI standards to implement FSSC 22000 version 6?
Right. Well, from other GFSI standards, you'll probably have covered quite a lot of elements, but not where I cover categorization of control measures, because categorization of control measures in ISO 22000 is quite unique, in that you're going to develop a hazard control plan that includes critical control points and operational prerequisite programs, and they're controlled by critical limits or action criteria. So that's the biggest difference, where you'll find might categorize your hazard differently, and it can be a bit confusing. But once you get into it, I think it's quite possible, yes. And
okay.
Yeah, it's quite there. Sorry.
Question from Agnieszka. In FSSC v version 5.1, we had to establish food safety objectives. In version 6, there is additional requirements related to food safety and quality. Do we have to now establish also quality and food safety culture objectives? If yes, could you give an example or two?
Yeah, okay. So yes, you have to have food safety and quality objectives, but also objectives to improve your overall food safety culture. So something like that could be staff retention. It could be improvement in staff morale by survey. It could be improvement in reduction in non-conformance, reduction in complaints.
Okay, Michelle's asking, is this SQF compliant? If you had, everything in place, I guess, from this, would you be compliant with SQF?
More than I would think, yes, you would be, but I wouldn't use this for SQF because we have specific packages for SQF.
Yeah. Okay.
And I might say, SQF and FSMA. This isn't FSMA or FSMA specific. So the SQF packages that we do would be much better if you want to achieve SQF certification.
Yeah. Sanath's asking, how many internal audits to be done in FSSC 6?
Well, you would need to cover all the aspects of the requirements in your internal audits. Now, normally I would say you'd split it into sections and do it throughout the year. So I would say you probably want to do at least a couple of months. So I do say I would probably do about 24 internal audits, possibly more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any free tools for food fraud assessment?
There's usually things on the FDA and USDA website offhand. I can't think of anything at the moment. No.
Right. Shahida is asking, can you advise again how to implement food safety culture in the organisation?
Right. Well, this is very difficult, but I mean, you don't implement it. The senior management team need to have the right philosophy and the right attitude, and it needs to be, this is how we do things here. Yeah. And they need to be communicating the site requirements, the standards, the food safety and quality policy and objectives. They need to cascade that. They need to have meetings with people, communication on notice boards, memos, have reviews with staff, review with staff exiting the organisation, do staff surveys to assess morale. And also and then monitor the actions you've taken to see if they're improving and having an effect on the organisation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Get rid of that one. How to implement a food loss and food waste, Ahmed? Any advice on that?
Yeah. If you need to look at different product areas, let's just go back quickly. And from product loss on site to surplus food that might go for animal feed to recycling in different ways. So the main thing is to start the thing on site and look at reducing wastage on site. And then look at what you can do. So here we are. Strategy is reduction at source. So reduce waste on site. So look at wastage. Are you overfilling? Are you losing too much product when you change over? Are you wasting too much product because you have too much stock and writing off stock? And then you look at donating food. So these are priorities. And then what food you can use for animal feed, and then other uses for food that don't involve landfills, such as fertilizer, digestion, composting, and then the last resort is landfill.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Question from Sanath. Is audit announced or unannounced in FSSC?
There are some unannounced, yes.
Right. Question from Eva. Is there any help coming on extensive additional requirements in version 6?
There's guidance on the FSSC 22,000 website, so you can look on there, and that they are putting and building a bank of guidance on there. So yeah, it's been developed from 2009 and it's still growing. Yes.
Okay, question from Gladys. Is preventive action not required in FSSC version 6? Was it already covered in risk assessment and only corrective action remains in addressing the non-conformance?
Yeah, sorry, Simon. Preventive action would probably come in where you're looking at, when you come onto performance analysis and review and looking at management review and continual improvement, you might raise some preventive actions there.
Okay.
To make improvements.
Just one more. Melissa Do you have any advice regarding a documented purchase specification for equipment management? How do we implement and manage this?
Well, it's so difficult with different types of equipment. So you need to get the specification from a supplier, but something like a brush or a bucket is completely different to a whole filling machine, which obviously needs to have compliance with food contact for food contact surfaces. So it's a vast range of specifications, but your supplier must be able to supply you with a specification, and then you should have somebody experienced in engineering and each department that will contribute to assessing what should be in that specification for equipment. So what does it need to do for production? How easy is it to maintain, and can it be maintained? Is it safe? Is it likely to cause any food safety hazard? And what do you need in that specification to ensure that it complies with your requirements?
Okay, brilliant. All right, I think we've got through them all now. Superb. Excellent content, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, we've gone a bit over, but it's well worth it. So we'll follow up with the recording, a PDF of the slides, and we'll link to the IFSQN FSSC version 6 template manuals, the extensive documentation that you see throughout this amazing resource, really. So, yeah, thanks very much. Have a nice weekend, everybody. Enjoy your weekend, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. You too, Simon.
Cheers. Bye-bye now.